Tu-95. And despite what you might think, the Tu-95 is far from that. This bomber, born in the dark ages of the Cold War, has German roots, and it became probably the most photographed aircraft in history, posing for photos with the American 3rd, 4th and even 5th generation fighters, intercepting it throughout the decades. But why do the Russians still have it? In 1958, the Bear demonstrated its power with a 17,100-kilometer non-stop flight, an endurance feat that left Western observers in awe. But it wasn't only range that surprised them. The projected speed for this aircraft was around 600 kilometers per hour with a range of 12,000 kilometers, but the actual speed was just below supersonic, and it could cover enormous distances and loiter for hours. And the key to this performance upgrade was the aforementioned Mk-12 engine. But what exactly was the catch and the secret behind it? Well, first of all, it was insanely powerful, with 40% more than engines on an Airbus A400M today. Second, the propeller was a work of art. Its contra-rotating propeller blades would cancel out torque and reduce the thrust loss after Mach 0.6 to 0.7, which is a well-known issue on turboprops. Then, it helps delay the onset of propeller blade shockwaves at high rotational speeds. And last but not least, the blades were actually designed in a way that their tips would actually rotate in supersonic speeds without the loss of efficiency. This is pretty much black magic. But the Tu-95 is no five-star hotel. A common crew complaint is the cramped cockpit, uncomfortable seats, and the fact that they don't have ejection seats at all. So in case this aircraft was going down, the only way to survive is to jump through the front wheel bay. And 2 crew members manning their cannons for self-defense could jump out of their own dedicated door. Initially, the Tu-95 was a free-fall bomb delivery platform, but in the 1960s, it began to carry cruise missiles, with the Tu-95K variant being fitted with the behemoth missile called the Ka-20. This evolution reflected broader Soviet doctrine, standoff delivery from safe distances, using bombers more as a missile launching platform than any sort of diving into the fray. Comrade Kuibyshev had a thing for missiles, and he saw them as the future of warfare, so ICBMs would be the tip of the spear and large bombers were useless. Unless, of course, they could carry missiles. World War II concluded with a deafening detonation and then silence that reshaped global power. With the atom bombs falling on Japan, the United States emerged as the dominant nuclear force, possessing not only the bomb, but the long-range bombers to deliver it. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, was left pretty vulnerable, not only lacking a bomb of its own, but also lacking any means for it to reach American soil. By 1949, things started to change, and Moscow had detonated its first atomic device, closing that nuclear gap in explosive terms. But delivering it across the globe, now that was still an issue. The Soviets had the Tu-4, a B-29 copy made from a US aircraft that made an emergency landing in the USSR during the War Pacific. It was pretty good for posturing, but obsolete before it rolled off the line. Uncle Sam had already leaped ahead with jet power bombers like the B-47 and was deep into development of their next greatest weapon, the B-52. The Soviet Union's attempt to scale up the Tu-4 into the Tu-85 didn't exactly work out. The performance fell short, and the Kremlin recognized the need for a clean slate design. Competing design bureaus were given the task to build a new strategic bomber. Messerschmitt decided to build a modern jet bomber, even though he knew that current jet technology would not give it the performance needed. But he did believe that better engines would arrive in the near future. However, his rival Tupolev opted for turboprop propulsion. It was less glamorous than jets, but better suited for extreme ranges and endurance. It was a gamble, but one that was backed by solid engineering logic. But for Tupolev, the real breakthrough came from the Germans. Using knowledge seized from Nazi Germany and the talents of relocated German engineers who were going on an extended holiday to Siberia, Soviet engineers were able to turn the theoretical German Jumo 022 into the most powerful turboprop ever flown. the Kuznetsov NK-12. And it's the most powerful turboprop engine still to this day. Its contra-rotating propellers produced a loud roar and performance figures that bordered on the unbelievable for a propeller-driven aircraft. The Tu-95 prototype took flight in 1952, initially with two TV2F engines. These engines were actually hybrids combined of two separate TV2 turboprops, having a single output and an overcomplicated gearbox, which of course led to a tragic crash. Alas, in 1953, a test pilot and several crew members were killed by this prototype, but the program continued undeterred. Switching to 4 Mk-12s with individual gearboxes to streamline the design, the aircraft was still notoriously loud, but its combination of speed, range, and altitude was nothing short of revolutionary, and most importantly, it was now reliable. The Tu-95 officially entered service in 1956, and what followed was one of the most remarkable careers in military aviation history. Well, at least before it got slapped by a drone from the Ukrainian equivalent of Walmart, but I'm getting ahead of myself. During the Cold War, the Tu-95 was one of the key tools of strategic intimidation. Regular flights near NATO borders triggered endless intercepts by Western fighters. Its lumbering pace was deceptive. The Bear was fast for a turboprop, and its endurance allowed it to reach far-flung patrol zones and stay there. And because it was so loud, NATO pilots could hear the Tu-95 coming long before it would show up on radar. The Soviets stationed their prize bombers in elite units like the 106th Heavy Bomber Aviation Division near Kiev, often parading them during drills and high-alert nuclear readiness exercises. While the US ran constant airborne alerts under Operation Chrome Dome, the Soviets held their bombers on ground standby, preferring rapid surge over continuous patrols. Which is something I want you to remember for something that's about to happen. But if push came to shove, the Tu-95s could be readied and launched with nuclear payloads in one final mission. But it wasn't just a nuclear mission that this airframe proved to be useful for. It was really quite adaptable. Tu-95 RTs became one of the most famous aircraft in the world because it was often pictured with NATO fighters that intercepted them over seas and oceans. It was a dedicated reconnaissance and SIG-INT version for the Soviet Navy and used throughout the Cold War. The Tu-126 was a flying radar station, the USSR's first AWACS aircraft. Then you have the Tu-142, which added maritime patrol and submarine hunting to the enormous resume. And a bizarre experimental aircraft, the Tu-95 LAL, was to carry an onboard nuclear reactor to test the feasibility of atomic-powered flight. The idea being that this aircraft could essentially fly forever, well, at least till the food ran out. But spoiler alert, it didn't work. It was even developed into a passenger airline called the Tu-114, a fine one, if I may add, because it actually ended up being one of the safest Soviet airliners ever built. But you wouldn't exactly want to fly on it because remember those noisy engines? But hey, do I hear you complaining, comrade? But with time came the necessary modernization program. The Tu-95MS of the 1980s introduced compatibility with the Ku-55 cruise missile, the long-range weapon that could be launched far from the battlefield, and while the MS-6 variant carried 6 missiles internally, the MS-16 added more externally on underwing pylons. These configurations gave the Bear a second life as a missile truck, one that didn't need to get close to the target to be deadly. By the 2010s, Russia initiated the MSM upgrade to keep the Bear flying into the 21st century. Out went the relic of the Cold War, the tailgun position, and in came the Meteor NM2 electronic warfare suite, modern digital cockpits, and the Novella radar system. The Ka-101 and 102 cruise missiles joined the arsenal, giving the Bear precision strike capabilities with both conventional and nuclear payloads, and the new Ka-555 missiles replaced the older 55s. The Bear returned to the battlefield after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022.